If you clicked on this video, you're most likely a new ARK player who's wondering how to tame wild dinos. I'm going to show you all the ins and outs of what you need to know, and by the end of this tutorial, you should be all set for almost any taming mission. There's a lot of information to go over, so let's get started.
Headshot.
The first thing you need to know about taming wild dinos is that it can be a very difficult thing to do, especially in the early game when you don't have a lot of resources to play with, so don't feel bad if you're having a hard time with it. Taming creatures becomes far easier later in the game when you have more capabilities. Anyway, we'll go over how to tame your first dino in a little bit, but before that, I want to give you an overhead view of how taming works so you can understand the process. So, there are only two main types of taming methods, knockout taming and passive taming. There are unique creatures that do require unique taming methods, but in this tutorial, we'll stick to the knockout method and the passive tame method since those are the two most prevalent taming methods. Most creatures in ARK require the knockout method, so let's go over that one first. In order to successfully tame a creature that requires the knockout method, you'll need a tool to tranquilize or knock out the creature. You can use your bare fists, a wooden club, or a slingshot with stones to knock a creature out, but you'll run the risk of killing that creature depending on how much health it has. The more effective way to knock out a dino is by using tranquilizer arrows or tranq darts. The more you knock out a wild dino, the more its torpor will increase. So, just to reiterate that, torpor is the measurement of how sedated a dino or player is. Some dinos have a high torpor threshold like a T-Rex, so it'll take a lot of tranq arrows to knock a T-Rex out. Other dinos have a low torpor threshold and are far easier to knock out, like a dodo. So just remember, torpor is simply the level of sedation that a player or dino is experiencing, and different creatures have different torpor thresholds. Once you get a wild dino's torpor level up high enough, it will collapse and you can start taming it. Go up to the knocked out creature and you'll notice an unconsciousness bar and a taming bar. You can use these two bars as a quick reference to the dino's status, but for more detailed information, we'll need to go into its inventory. So let's open up its inventory. You will notice that the creature's torpor bar will slowly drop over time. If the torpor bar drops too low, that creature will wake up and you'll have to knock it out again if you want to continue taming it. The torpor bar is the same thing as the unconsciousness bar we saw a moment ago. In order for you to keep the creature sedated, you'll need to force feed it narcoberries or narcotics. You should try to keep the torpor bar over half full at all times, so make sure you have a lot of narcoberries or narcotics on standby before you knock out a creature. Just as a quick note, it's always a good idea to use narcotics to keep a tranquilized creature sedated, but early in the game you'll probably have to use narcoberries. Now that you know what torpor is and how you need to monitor it, let's quickly talk about taming effectiveness and the dino's food bar. While the dino is knocked out, its food bar will start depleting, which is a good thing. Once its food bar drops a little bit, it will want to eat some food, so you'll need to put food into its inventory. Every time it eats, you will notice that its taming bar will go up. And no, force feeding it food won't work. And this is where taming effectiveness comes in. There's a hierarchy of food that different dinos prefer, and if you feed a knocked out dino a food that it really likes, the taming bar will fill up much faster every time it eats. Not only does their taming bar fill up faster, but you'll also end up with a higher level dino at the end of the taming process. So, for example, an herbivore likes berries, but they prefer vegetables. Berries work, but it takes a lot of time to tame an herbivore with them, and they'll come out a lower level. They like vegetables quite a bit more than berries, so they'll get tamed quicker and end up being a higher level. So it's definitely preferable to feed them vegetables, but you'll need a farm before you can do that. Carnivores, on the other hand, prefer meats. They like raw meat, they prefer raw prime meat, and they love raw mutton. The best taming effectiveness you can achieve is done by feeding knocked out dinos kibble. So if you want a perfect tame, you'll need to find a max level wild dino and feed it only its preferred kibble during the taming process. We're not going to talk too much about kibble in this tutorial because that's something you'll worry about later in the game, but I'll make sure to give you an excellent resource at the end of this tutorial, so if you're curious about kibble, you'll have a place to go to learn about that. So before we get into passive taming, let's just quickly summarize your typical knockout tame. You first need to knock out the dino by using your fists, a wooden club, or a slingshot, but ideally you use trank arrows or trank darts. Once it's passed out, you need to monitor its torpor level so it doesn't wake up. Feed it narco berries, or preferably narcotics, to keep it tranquilized. Once its food bar drops a little ways, it will eat the food you've placed in its inventory. Every time it eats, its taming bar will go up. If you want the taming bar to go up faster, you need to feed it something it likes. Herbivores like berries but prefer vegetables. Carnivores like raw meat. They like raw prime meat even more, and they love raw mutton. By feeding a knocked out dino a food that it loves will not only result in a quicker tame, but it will also result in a higher level dino once it's tamed. Later on in the game, you will start to worry more about getting perfect tames by using kibble. I know that was a lot of information, but it was all necessary to go over. If you don't feel confident with a knockout tame still, try rewatching that segment of this tutorial. You may pick up on something you might have missed the first time around. Okay, now on to passive taming. Passive taming is a more rare type of taming method because most creatures require the knockout method. That being said, some of the best creatures in ARK do require the passive tame method, like the Basilosaurus. Passive tames will require you to feed the target creature while it's still alert and moving around. This can sometimes be difficult because some creatures become hostile if they catch you. One of the best passive tames to practice on is the dung beetle. Dung beetles like to eat feces, so you'll need to put the poop in the 0 slot of your tool belt. If you're playing on console, I believe you'll need to put the fecal matter in the far right slot of your tool belt, so whatever button that is. Then, you simply sneak up behind the dung beetle and feed it. On PC, you would press the E key, E as in echo. For a lot of passive tames, the time it takes between the first feeding and the second feeding takes the longest, and then after that it will go faster from there. So don't fret too much if it takes 5 minutes between the first feeding and the second. So now let's talk about getting your very first tame. You're probably going to want to get the Carbonimus first, but if you're feeling hardcore, you can go for a Triceratops. However, I suggest starting out with a Carbonimus because they're slow, you can craft a saddle for them at level 10, and they are decent at collecting berries, so you don't have to spend so much time hand-picking plants for narco berries for your next tame. Essentially, the Carbonimus is a really great first dino to tame, especially if you're new to ARK. Before you start knocking out a Carbonimus, make sure you have a stockpile of narco berries to force feed it to keep it asleep once it's knocked out. You'll also need to craft at least 1 slingshot, and you'll need a lot of stone in your inventory. Once all of that is prepared, go ahead and start hitting the Carbonimus in the head. Continue to do so until it's knocked out. After that, you should know what to do. And that's it as far as taming basics go, but here are just a couple more tips. If you're going to tame something that's fast and dangerous, it's a good idea to build a taming pen, or better yet, a taming raft to lure it into. A good size for a taming pen is 2 foundations wide by 3 foundations long. The taming pen should at least be made out of stone because most dinos can break down wooden and thatched structures. Once you get the dino into the pen, you can take your sweet time knocking it out from there. Another thing to mention is that you want to protect the knocked out dino that you're taming. If it takes damage from another dino or player, that will diminish its taming effectiveness and you'll end up with a lower level dino once it's tamed. That's another benefit of luring dinos into taming pens. It protects the downed dino. If a taming pen is a no-go for some reason, you could place spikes around the knocked out creature, but that's kind of a resource-heavy thing to do because spikes aren't cheap. If you're trying to tame something small, like a Pteranodon or a Raptor, you can use bolas to freeze them in place for 10 seconds or so. During that time, you might be able to knock it out by hitting it in the head with trank arrows or trank darts. For taming large flyers like an Argentavis, a taming pen with a ceiling will make it much easier. Anyway, I think I've stuffed enough information into your head for now. For more information about taming, I highly recommend visiting the ARK Gamepedia website. I'll put a link in the description of this video so you can find it easily. It's by far the best resource for anything you need to know about ARK, including what creatures prefer which type of kibble, or which dinos are passive tames and which ones are knockout tames. Passive tamed dinos oftentimes require odd foods, so you'll probably need to look up what type of food you'll need to use for taming them. And the food hierarchy we went over earlier in this video was just a general rule, and it might not apply to the herbivore or carnivore that you're taming. It might like fish, for example, so go to Gamepedia for that type of specific information. Alright, well I'm gonna stop there. Sorry if we got a little bit too much into the weeds in this tutorial, but I wanted to impart as much information as I could in the shortest amount of time possible for your convenience. If you found this tutorial helpful, please consider dropping a thumbs up on it, and if you'd like to support the Havoc Gaming channel, a subscription would be extremely helpful. Thanks for watching, and Godspeed.